Hi, I'm Matthew, and welcome back to Dark Ascent. Today, I'm going to uncover the Everest climb, where a family ignored their Sherpas' warnings and faced deadly consequences. Driven by ego and a bucket list obsession, they ignored repeated safety warnings and pushed on despite severe altitude sickness. What followed was a decision so catastrophic it still haunts the guides who were there. It was March 15th, 2016, when the Johnson family arrived at Tribhuvan International Airport in Kathmandu, Nepal, a bustling hub filled with trekkers, climbers, vendors, and the scents of incense and brewed tea. Outside, the crisp Himalayan air hinted at distant peaks, while rickshaws, taxis, and porters crowded the streets, ready to guide adventurers to lodges and trailheads. Herschel Johnson, 48, worked as a software engineer in Colorado, where he had recently earned a promotion to senior architect. The new position came with a salary increase that finally made this $28,000 family expedition financially feasible. For 3 years, he had been planning this trek as a way to create lasting memories with his daughters before they left for college. The family had spent countless weekends hiking Colorado's 14ers, and Herschel felt confident their mountain experience had prepared them for the Himalayas. I can see they are fit and ready, but I know fitness only goes so far in the Himalayas. Laika Johnson, 45, taught mathematics at a local high school and had completed the Boston Marathon twice. She handled most of the family's travel planning and had researched the Everest Base Camp trek extensively. Based on her reading, the standard 14-day route seemed manageable for a family with their fitness level and hiking background. She had chosen a mid-tier adventure company that promised experienced Sherpa guides and proper safety protocols. Crystal Johnson, 16, a junior in high school, ran cross-country and possessed the strong cardiovascular fitness typical of competitive teenage athletes. She had been training specifically for the trek by running stadium stairs for 6 months and was excited about the unique experience she could highlight in college applications. The Instagram potential of reaching Everest Base Camp added to her enthusiasm. Sheila Johnson, 13, an 8th grader and soccer player, stood just 5 feet, 2 inches tall, and weighed 105 pounds, making her the smallest family member. She felt less enthusiastic about the challenging trek, but didn't want to be left out of the family adventure. She had mild asthma that remained well controlled at Denver's 5,280-foot elevation, and her parents saw no reason for concern. The family spent 2 days in Kathmandu, acclimatizing and finalizing gear rentals. They purchased additional high-altitude clothing from local outfitters and met with their assigned guide team. Pemba Norbu, a 34-year-old Sherpa with 12 years of guiding experience, would lead their trek along with his assistant, Ang Dorje, who had completed the Everest Base Camp route over 40 times. I'm looking at this and thinking these guides know exactly what they're doing, but I can already feel the tension building for the family. On March 17, the family boarded a Twin Otter aircraft for the notorious flight to Lukla Airport. The 30-minute flight offered spectacular views of terraced hillsides and snow-capped peaks, but the landing at Lukla's short, sloped runway at 9,383 feet elevation provided their first real taste of Himalayan adventure. The airport, carved into a mountainside with a 2,000-foot drop at the end of the runway, had earned its reputation as one of the world's most dangerous. I can't get over how insane this landing must feel. I would be gripping the seat the whole time. The trek would follow the traditional route through Namche Bazaar, Tengbosch, Dingbosch, and Labuche before reaching base camp at 17,598 feet. March represented the beginning of the pre-monsoon season, typically offering stable weather conditions with clear mountain views. Early forecasts appeared favorable, showing daytime temperatures around 45 degrees Fahrenheit in lower elevations, dropping to 15 degrees Fahrenheit at night in the higher camps. It's kind of exciting and scary thinking about hiking all the way up here. I know the views are amazing, but it's not going to be easy. However, meteorologists in New Delhi had begun tracking a large weather system developing over the Bay of Bengal. The system showed potential for rapid intensification, though current models suggested it wouldn't reach the Everest region for at least a week. The first day's hike from Lukla to Pakding covered 5 miles with a descent of about 1,000 feet. The family moved with enthusiasm and energy, covering the distance faster than Pemba had anticipated. The trail followed the Dud Koshi River through pine forests and small Sherpa villages, offering their first glimpse of traditional mountain life. They are moving so fast, and I doubt most people could keep up. With that pace, Herschel felt invigorated by the crisp mountain air and the realization that their long-planned adventure had finally begun. Laika documented the journey with photographs and detailed journal entries, noting the prayer flags, mani stones, and Buddhist stupas that mark their passage through this sacred landscape. Crystal and Sheila adapted quickly to the rhythm of trekking, though Sheila found the heavy pack more challenging than expected. That evening at the tea house in Fakding, Pemba observed the family's behavior during dinner. They ate heartily and showed good spirits, but he noticed they weren't drinking as much water as he typically recommended for trekkers. When he suggested they consume at least 3 liters per day to aid acclimatization, Herschel dismissed the advice as overly cautious, pointing to their experience hiking in Colorado. "I can't help thinking this is the kind of moment where things start going wrong. It feels like they're already tempting trouble without realizing it." The second day brought a steady climb from Pakding to Namche Bazaar. Gaining 2,300 feet over 6 miles, the trail crossed several suspension bridges over the rushing Dud Koshi River, including the famous Hillary Suspension Bridge at 9,350 feet. The family maintained a brisk pace, eager to reach Namche Bazaar, the unofficial capital of the Khumbu region. Namche Bazaar sits in a natural amphitheater at 11,286 feet, surrounded by towering peaks including the first clear views of Everest for many trekkers. The family arrived in good condition, though Laika had developed a slight headache that she attributed to dehydration. They are smiling and buying snacks, but I can tell they have no idea what is coming. They spent the afternoon exploring the town's shops and bakeries, purchasing additional supplies and enjoying the novelty of finding internet access at such a remote location. Pemba had planned a rest day in Namche Bazaar for acclimatization, following the standard protocol of climb high, sleep low. However, Herschel expressed concern about the additional cost of an extra night's accommodation and meals. The family had budgeted carefully for the trek, and unexpected expenses worried him. After some discussion, they agreed to take only a half-rest day, planning to depart early the following morning. The third day involved an acclimatization hike to the Everest View Hotel at 13,000 feet before returning to sleep in Namche Bazaar. This protocol allowed their bodies to experience higher altitude while returning to sleep at a lower elevation. The family completed the hike successfully, though Sheila complained of feeling tired and slightly nauseous during the ascent. At the Everest View Hotel, they enjoyed their first clear view of Mount Everest's summit pyramid, along with Lhotse, Nuptse, and Amadablam. The site provided a powerful reminder of their ultimate destination and renewed their determination to reach base camp. However, Pemba noticed that Sheila's appetite had decreased, and she picked at her lunch without finishing it. The fourth day brought the trek from Namche Bazaar to Tengboche Monastery at 12,687 feet. The 6-mile route offered spectacular mountain views, but included significant elevation gain and loss as the trail descended to cross the Dud Koshi River before climbing steeply to Tengboche. The family started early, hoping to reach the monastery in time for the afternoon prayer ceremony. During the ascent to Tengboche, Sheila began experiencing more pronounced symptoms. She developed a persistent headache and complained of feeling dizzy during steep sections of the trail. Laika, walking behind her younger daughter, noticed that Sheila's pace had slowed considerably and that she was breathing more heavily than usual. "I can see this is when things start getting real, and their bodies are already crying for help." At Tengboche, the family attended the prayer ceremony at the famous monastery, surrounded by some of the world's most spectacular mountain scenery. However, Sheila felt too unwell to fully appreciate the experience. She ate very little at dinner and went to bed early, complaining of nausea and a worsening headache. Pemba approached Herschel and Laika that evening to discuss Sheila's symptoms. He explained that headaches, nausea, and loss of appetite represented classic signs of acute mountain sickness and recommended they consider taking an extra rest day at Tengboche. Herschel appreciated the guide's concern, but felt confident that Sheila would improve with a good night's sleep and proper hydration. The fifth day involved trekking from Tengboche to Dingboche, a distance of 7 miles with an elevation gain to 14,469 feet. The route crossed alpine meadows and offered stunning views of Island Peak and the south face of Lhotse. However, the higher altitude began affecting the entire family more noticeably. Sheila's condition had not improved overnight. She woke with the same headache and felt nauseous after attempting to eat breakfast. Laika also began experiencing symptoms, developing a persistent dry cough that worsened throughout the day. Crystal, despite her athletic conditioning, found herself breathing more heavily than expected and felt unusually fatigued. Seeing them struggle like this makes me realize how unforgiving these mountains really are, no matter how prepared you think you are. The trail to Dingbosch proved more challenging than previous days, with longer stretches above treeline and exposure to stronger winds. The family's pace slowed considerably, requiring frequent rest stops. Pemba and Ang Dorje exchanged concerned glances as they observed the family's deteriorating condition, but Herschel remained determined to maintain their schedule. At Dingbosch, the family faced their first night sleeping above 14,000 feet. The village sits in a broad valley surrounded by towering peaks, offering spectacular scenery, but also exposure to the harsh realities of high-altitude trekking. The temperature dropped to 20 degrees Fahrenheit that night, and the thin air made sleep difficult for all family members. Sheila's symptoms worsened during the night. She experienced severe headaches that prevented restful sleep and vomited twice before morning. Laika's cough became more pronounced, and she noticed some difficulty breathing deeply. Crystal complained of feeling weak and had little appetite for breakfast. I could feel the tension in the air even from a distance, and it hit me how quickly a fun adventure can turn into a fight just to keep going. Pemba made a more direct recommendation. The following morning, he suggested the family take a full rest day in Dingbosch and consider descending if symptoms didn't improve. He explained that continuing to ascend with worsening altitude sickness symptoms could lead to serious complications. However, Herschel felt they had come too far to turn back and believed the symptoms would improve as their bodies adjusted. The sixth day brought an acclimatization hike to Nagarjun Hill at 16,175 feet before returning to sleep in Dingbosch. This represented a crucial test of the family's ability to handle higher altitudes. The hike proved extremely challenging for all family members, with frequent stops required for rest and recovery. During the ascent, Sheila's condition became alarming. She moved very slowly, stopping frequently to catch her breath, and complained of severe dizziness. At one point, she sat down on the trail and said she felt too weak to continue. Laika, despite her own worsening cough, helped support her daughter during the most difficult sections. Crystal, typically the strongest hiker in the family, found herself struggling more than expected. Her usual energy and enthusiasm had disappeared, replaced by a grim determination to simply put one foot in front of the other. She began experiencing mild nausea and noticed that her appetite had completely vanished. Watching them struggle made me realize just how cruel the mountains can be, and how quickly determination can turn into desperation when your body refuses to cooperate. The view from Nagarjun Hill provided spectacular panoramas of Makalu, Cho-Oyu, and other 8,000-meter peaks, but the family felt too unwell to fully appreciate the scenery. The descent back to Dingbosch proved almost as challenging as the ascent, with several family members experiencing dizziness and unsteadiness on the rocky terrain. That evening, Pemba held a serious conversation with Herschel and Lahaika about their family's condition. He explained that all 4 family members were showing signs of moderate to severe acute mountain sickness, and that continuing to ascend could result in life-threatening complications. He strongly recommended immediate descent to a lower altitude. Herschel listened to the guide's concerns but remained reluctant to abandon their goal when they were so close to base camp. He had invested significant money in the trek and felt that turning back would represent failure. Laika, despite her own discomfort, supported her husband's decision to continue, believing they could manage their symptoms with medication and determination. The 7th day involved trekking from Dingbosch to Labuche at 16,175 feet, bringing the family to within striking distance of their ultimate goal. The 4-mile route followed a gradual ascent through the Khumbu Valley, passing memorials to climbers who had died on Everest. The stark landscape and thin air created an otherworldly atmosphere that would have been inspiring under different circumstances. I remember thinking as I watched them push on that stubbornness can feel heroic at first, but also terrifying when the mountains start fighting back. However, the family's condition continued to deteriorate. Sheila could barely eat breakfast and vomited shortly after starting the trek. Her headache had become constant and severe, and she complained of feeling confused and disoriented. Laika's cough had worsened overnight, and she noticed some difficulty breathing even during rest periods. Crystal experienced severe fatigue that made each step an enormous effort. She had developed a headache similar to her sister's and felt nauseous throughout the day. Herschel, who had been the strongest family member up to this point, began experiencing his own symptoms, including mild headaches and unusual shortness of breath. The trek to La Bouche proved to be the most challenging day yet. The family required frequent rest stops, and their pace slowed to less than 1 mile per hour. Pemba and Ngdorje took turns supporting Sheila, who struggled to maintain her balance on the rocky terrain. Several times, the guide suggested turning back, but the family pressed forward. I see them sick and freezing, but still pushing forward, and I know most people would turn around here at La Bouche. The family faced their highest sleeping altitude yet. The village consists of a few basic lodges serving trekkers and climbers heading to base camp or attempting Everest itself. The thin air at 16,175 feet made every activity more difficult, from climbing stairs to eating meals. That night proved extremely difficult for all family members. Sheila's condition had progressed beyond simple altitude sickness. She experienced severe headaches, persistent vomiting, and periods of confusion. Her lips showed a slight blue tinge, indicating inadequate oxygen levels in her blood. Laika's breathing difficulties worsened, and she developed a wet cough that suggested fluid accumulation in her lungs. Crystal and Herschel also experienced the worsening symptoms. Crystal felt weak and dizzy, with severe nausea that prevented her from eating. Herschel developed more pronounced headaches and noticed that his thinking felt sluggish and unclear. None of the family members slept well, and they all felt worse in the morning than they had the previous evening. Pemba made his strongest recommendation yet the following morning. He explained that the family was showing signs of serious altitude sickness that could progress to life-threatening conditions. He insisted they needed to descend immediately, at least to Dingboche, or preferably to Namche Bazaar. He offered to arrange for additional porters to help carry their gear and support the family during descent. I kept thinking about how clear the danger was and how stubborn people can be when they've got a goal in their heads. It's hard not to worry watching them ignore the signs. However, the family had reached a psychological point of no return. They were only 1 day away from Everest Base Camp, the goal they had planned and saved for over 3 years. Herschel felt that descending now would mean complete failure and waste of their significant investment. Laika, despite her obvious illness, supported the decision to attempt base camp, believing they could manage 1 more day. The weather forecast for March 28th showed increasing clouds and wind, with a possibility of afternoon storms. The large weather system tracked over the Bay of Bengal had intensified and was moving toward the Himalayas, faster than initially predicted. However, morning conditions appeared acceptable for the final push to base camp. The 8th day began at 4:30 a.m., with the family's attempt to reach Everest Base Camp. The route from La Bouche to base camp covers approximately 4 miles, with an elevation gain of about 1,400 feet, following the Khumbu Glacier through a landscape of rock, ice, and glacial debris. Under normal circumstances, the trek would take 4 to 6 hours for acclimatized trekkers. Watching them push forward, even when everything inside screams to stop, makes me feel the weight of obsession and how dangerous it can be up here. However, the Johnson family was far from normal circumstances. All 4 members showed severe symptoms of altitude sickness, and their pace had slowed to a crawl. Sheila could barely walk without support, requiring assistance from both guides. Laika's breathing had become labored even during rest periods, and her cough produced pink-tinged sputum that alarmed Pemba. Crystal moved like someone in a trance, focusing all her energy on simply placing 1 foot in front of the other. Her usual athletic grace had disappeared, replaced by an unsteady, uncertain gait. Herschel, despite his determination to reach base camp, found his thinking increasingly clouded and his coordination deteriorating. The weather began changing around 8 a.m., with increasing winds and rapidly building clouds. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the visibility started to decrease as blowing snow created intermittent whiteout conditions. Pemba recommended turning back immediately, but the family had committed themselves to reaching base camp and refused to consider retreat. By 10 a.m., the family had reached approximately 16,900 feet, still 700 feet below base camp. Weather had deteriorated significantly, with winds exceeding 60 miles per hour and temperatures dropping to minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Blowing snow created complete whiteout conditions, making navigation extremely difficult, even for experienced guides. At this point, the combination of severe altitude sickness, extreme weather, and physical exhaustion created a perfect storm of dangerous conditions. Herschel, who had been struggling with increasing confusion and disorientation, suddenly collapsed on the trail. He appeared conscious but couldn't stand or walk, and his speech became slurred and incoherent. I can see that determination is not enough, and nature does not care how strong someone thinks they are. If you're following this story and realizing how dangerous it can get, make sure to like the video and subscribe to see more real-life extreme adventure stories like this. Laika attempted to help her husband while calling for the guides, but her own condition had deteriorated to a critical point. Her breathing became extremely labored, and she began coughing up pink, frothy sputum, clear signs of high-altitude pulmonary edema. The fluid accumulating in her lungs made each breath a struggle, and she couldn't provide effective assistance to Herschel. Crystal and Sheila, approximately 50 yards ahead on the trail, had stopped moving forward and huddled together against the wind and blowing snow. Both girls were suffering from severe altitude sickness, combined with rapidly developing hypothermia. The extreme cold and their weakened condition from days of inadequate food and sleep created a dangerous situation that deteriorated rapidly. Pemba and Ang Dorje immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. They had emergency oxygen and warming equipment, but the whiteout conditions made it extremely difficult to locate and assist all 4 family members simultaneously. The guides made the difficult decision to split up, with each taking responsibility for locating part of the family. Dorje found Crystal and Sheila first, after 45 minutes of searching in the blinding snow. Both girls were unconscious, their body temperatures having dropped to dangerous levels. He immediately began emergency warming procedures and administered supplemental oxygen, but their condition appeared critical. Pemba located Herschel and Laika approximately 20 minutes later. Herschel was unresponsive, showing signs of severe high-altitude cerebral edema with brain swelling that had progressed beyond the point of recovery. Laika remained barely conscious but was struggling to breathe due to advanced high-altitude pulmonary edema with her lungs filled with fluid. Despite the guides' immediate implementation of emergency protocols, including supplemental oxygen, warming techniques, and preparation for emergency evacuation, the combination of severe altitude sickness, hypothermia, and the time elapsed in extreme conditions had created an irreversible situation. The storm prevented any possibility of helicopter evacuation for at least 18 hours, and the family's condition was beyond what could be managed in the field. The weather system that had been tracking across the Bay of Bengal had intensified into a major storm that brought sustained winds over 80 miles per hour and temperatures below -20 degrees Fahrenheit to the high Himalayas. The storm lasted for nearly 20 hours, making any rescue attempt impossible until the morning of March 29th, when helicopter evacuation finally became possible. Nepalese authorities coordinated with the family's trekking company to transport all 4 family members to Kathmandu. However, all 4 were pronounced dead at the scene. The bodies were flown to Tribhuvan International Airport and then transported to Kathmandu Medical College for examination. The coroner's report identified the primary causes of death as high-altitude cerebral edema for Herschel, high-altitude pulmonary edema for Laika, and severe hypothermia combined with altitude sickness for Crystal and Sheila. The report noted that immediate descent at the first signs of severe altitude sickness symptoms could have prevented the tragedy. I can't help but wonder if this tragedy could have been prevented. It seems obvious now that turning back at the first signs of severe altitude sickness might have saved them, but I also feel for the family. They were experienced hikers, fit and determined, and sometimes that confidence turns into stubbornness. I don't think it's as simple as blaming them entirely. Part of the responsibility lies with the guides and trekking companies to enforce safety rules, but at the same time, each person has to listen to their own body. It's a haunting reminder of how dangerous high-altitude mountains can be, no matter your experience or preparation. The incident led to increased safety protocols for trekking companies regarding mandatory descent procedures when clients show severe altitude sickness symptoms. It's heartbreaking to watch, but I know this is why listening to guides and turning back early can save lives.